Today we are strapping in for a fascinating journey back to the NBA of the 1990s and late 80s. But we're bypassing the usual nostalgia trip. You know, the championships, the slam dunks, right? We are not talking about the highlights today, no. We're plunging into something far more intricate, something foundational. We are talking about the unwritten NBA code. And more importantly, what happens when that code, which, it demands silence and discipline, collides violently with pure, unadulterated charisma and the need for relevance. The focus is one of the most persistent, enduring, and frankly, one-sided feuds in basketball history. Charles Oakley versus Charles Barkley. That's it. This is not like treating this conflict as like tabloid fodder. We need to understand why these two Charleses, who are, physically built so similarly and entered the league at the same time, ended up living by totally different rules. Sometimes NBA beef isn't about points or punches in the way you think. It is purely about a clash of codes. You had Charles Oakley, who is defined by enforcing a silent order in the paint, demanding respect through pain and loyalty. And then you had Charles Barkley, who made chaos and, the open mic his entire brand. He demanded attention through performance and charisma. A conflict that's fundamentally philosophical. It is the silent code versus the open mic, the muscle versus the media, the bruise versus the banter. It is about unpacking how these two men, who shared so much on-court DNA at the start, became these diametrically opposed symbols of a culture war. A culture war that, consumed the 90s NBA and you could argue persists even today in how we value professional athletes. So let's start the journey. This is where the beef wasn't physical yet, but it was already being called into existence by their completely opposite professional philosophies. Let's examine that common ground first. Both entered the league around at the same time. One is 1984 and other one is 85. The similarities are striking, aren't they? They really are, and I think they get overlooked because how famous their differences became later on. Both were forwards. Both were technically undersized for the brutality of the front courts back then. But they were built like, brick houses. Yeah, linebackers stuffed into basketball jerseys. That is the image. They were both known for just out-muscling centers who were, half a foot taller than them. This was the era when you were expected to run a play through the elbow or the post on, like every possession. They were perfectly built for that grinding, physical aesthetic of the late 80s NBA. Perfectly. But as soon as you look beyond their physical stature, that is when the parallel timeline just fractures dramatically. And you can see the foundations of the future conflict being poured right there. Look at their origins. Oakley came from Virginia Union, a Division II HBCU program. His entire identity was forged in a place where, success wasn't guaranteed by talent alone. Pure grit. He sought to fight. His entire presence on the court was about establishing a physical dominance and enforcing unspoken rules that, went way beyond that official rule book. And Barkley, though, he arrived from Auburn, and even though he was undersized, he was already a phenomenon. And crucially, he was overconfident and already too loud. Yeah, that is the key. Barkley wasn't subtle. He had this innate star power that came out not just in his play, but in his whole performance. He was the kind of star who could drop, an incredibly efficient 40 points in a game. But his first act wouldn't be to quietly shake hands. It would be to find a microphone or just tell the nearest person exactly how easy it was. All while the opponent is still trying to figure out how they just completely torched. His value was instant. It was inherent. And it was all centered on self-promotion. So right there, you immediately see the dynamic that predestinated this conflict. This analysis frames Oakley as the ultimate supporting cast member, the protector. He protected the stars. He was Michael Jordan's early enforcer in Chicago. Literally the guy who hit people for him. His entire value system was defined by the security and the physical order he provided so that other people could shine. And Barkley, he was the star. but he was a star who constantly put himself in harm's way, often meeting protection less from opponents and more, yes, from his own mouth. His constant commentary, his unfiltered persona, it created constant risk. So this contrast, the silent protector whose value comes from enforcing boundaries versus the loud, self-aware target who constantly pushes them. That is what created a powder keg waiting for a spark. They were simply built to clash. It was inevitable. But hold on, if Barkley was constantly putting himself at risk with his mouth, wasn't he also backing it up with, historically great play? That seems to undermine Oakley's later claim that Barkley doesn't back it up. That is a crucial distinction. Oakley's code, it wasn't about whether you were good at basketball. Barkley was undeniably great. It was about how you carried yourself. So it is about presentation, not the stats. Barkley was great, yes, but he verbalized his greatness. He made it a performance. In Oakley's world, if you talked about your own achievements, you hadn't earned the right to have others talk about them for you. It wasn't about the box score, it was about the humility and the respect shown to the opponent, to the game itself. Barkley violated the code of silence and humility, regardless of whether he won an MVP. So let's delve deeper into that code then, because this seems to be an operating system that drove Oakley's entire career and ultimately this lifelong resentment toward Barkley. It is just play hard, defend your team, never talk more than you play. Respect for Oakley wasn't a verbal transaction at all. It was earned through pain and silence, that's it. This code is perfectly encapsulated by that key phrase, loyalty legacy. For Oakley, the ultimate professional value was unwavering commitment to the uniform, to the team, and to the absolute physical truth of the game. He wasn't playing for individual fame or, for future TV contracts. He was playing to enforce an institutional order and uphold his team's honor, no matter what the personal cost was. He wasn't just a player, he was the code guy on every single roster he was on, especially with the Bulls and those iconic Knicks teams. You hear names like Rick Mahorn in Detroit or Charles Oakley in New York, even Bill Laimbeer, the enforcers. These were the players who didn't just score points, they were the moral arbiters of what was acceptable behavior in the paint. They established the physical boundaries, and if you crossed them, consequences were immediate, silent, and often pretty painful. Now contrast that with Barkley's completely opposite professional universe. His world revolved around starting the conversation first and then delivering the performance to back it up. He thrived not just on trash talk aimed at opponents, but on commentary directed at himself, at his own fame. He actively courted the TV cameras. That Barkley could have easily transitioned into professional wrestling during his career, embracing the theatrics, the mic work, the deliberate creation of conflict, just for the entertainment, while Oakley, by stark contrast, was the bodyguard of outside the arena. He was the guy making sure the theatrics stay inside the ring and that any real-world transgression is met with real-world consequences. So when Barkley, especially as his fame grew and he moved into commentary, started taking verbal shots at the Knicks, at Oakley's old teammates, at the whole old guard, Oakley didn't process that as sports analysis or, friendly banter. To the code guy who valued silence and action above everything else, that was a violation. It was an undermining of the moral hierarchy that Oakley believed he was responsible for maintaining. And this distinction is so vital for you, the listener, to grasp. In Oakley's reality, words had concrete weight and intent. If you issued a verbal challenge, you were issuing a physical challenge, and you had better be ready to pay the price. But Barkley was already operating on this whole other plane of media and entertainment where verbal shots are just part of the show. They are often designed to be laughed off. The Sopranos is the perfect analogy. It really is. It perfectly encapsulates that feeling of being betrayed by a world that is changing around you. It does. If you view Oakley as Tony Soprano specifically, Tony is struggling to reconcile his old world code-based morality with the modern world. Legalized business, therapy, all that external scrutiny. You understand his dilemma. Oakley is a man living strictly by the rules of the street, or in this case, the unwritten rules of the paint, that the rapidly modernizing NBA just doesn't agree to or respect anymore. He is desperately trying to hold on to an old way of life that is just fast becoming obsolete. So what are the specific rules of the street in Sopranos that parallels Oakley's code? Well, it is the value system. Tony's world values loyalty above everything else. It distrusts outsiders. It prioritizes respect through fear and physical presence. And it sees transparency or self-reflection as a dangerous weakness. Oakley's code is identical. Loyalty to the team is non-negotiable. Silence protects a group. Physical toughness is the only true currency. So when the NBA started demanding image control, marketing campaigns, and all that external commentary, it was like asking Tony Soprano to start filing taxes or going to therapy. It felt like a fundamental betrayal of everything he stood for. And Barkley, in this analogy, in the perfect foil, Chris Rock. He is the charismatic, punchline-driven showman, unstoppable with a mic. Barkley generates his power not from fear or physical enforcement. So the tragedy of the conflict then is that it's not really malicious. No. Oakley feels fundamentally and personally disrespected by Barkley's constant chatter and his embrace of the media age. But Barkley, he is so entrenched in his role as the necessary entertainer, the truth teller, that he genuinely doesn't even realize he's crossed a line that matters to Oakley. It is an honest philosophical disagreement about what professional integrity even means. Tragically dressed up as this long-running basketball grudge, and Oakley delivered the perfect line to sum up his ethos, like, respect doesn't need a camera. That is his whole worldview in 5 words. If you truly respect it, you don't need a broadcast. You simply are respected, and people, opponents, teammates, they govern their actions based on your presence. And Barkley's fame, which was built almost entirely on the camera and the mic, was, by Oakley's definition, less respectable. The irony, of course, is that as the league shifted, the cameras began to dictate who got respect. The stars who commanded largest audiences commanded the largest checks and the most influence. And this was the shift that caused Oakley this profound professional trauma. He felt his world slipping away, and Barkley was the loud, laughing, eloquent face of that revolution, which sets the scene perfectly for the definitive confrontation, the slap heard around the lockout. The context leading up to the slap, which happened in the late 90s, is just paramount. By this time, the seismic cultural shift in the NBA was well underway. Oakley wasn't just observing the change anymore, he was being systematically rendered obsolete by it. What were the tangible physical rule changes or cultural shifts that were systematically devaluing Oakley's specific skill set? So late 90s marked the start of the NBA's deliberate move toward an image polish and freedom of movement. Historically, enforcers like Oakley thrived under rules that tolerated hand-checking and allowed for immense physical disruption of offensive players. You could really put a body on someone. Right, but post Michael Jordan's retirement and return, and certainly by the late 90s lockout, the league realized its product was best served by allowing its stars to shine unobstructed. So the subtle changes in officiating, the increased focus on foul calls for simple contact, the eventual erosion of hand-checking, these were all aimed at increasing scoring and making the game smoother. But they also effectively nurtured the physical deterrents like Oakley. His entire job was being legislated out of existence. Precisely the role he defined, the physical protector who enforced consequences, was being systematically written out of the game. He was a relic before the 2000s even began. And this deep-seated frustration over the demise of the old-school ethos, that is what set the stage for the highly charged confrontation in that lockout meeting. Yeah, the moment arrived during a serious, high-stakes NBA Players Association meeting during the 98-99 lockout. So the players are discussing millions of dollars, the future structures of their salaries, the financial stability of the whole league. It is a very serious, very tense environment, and in the middle of all this, Barkley was being Barkley, talking a lot, probably filling the room with his typical blend of self-aware controversy and unfiltered opinion. And Oakley, who was already stewing in the frustration of a world that no longer valued his toughness, and with years of philosophical disagreement just boiling over, he reached his breaking point. He stood up and slapped him. It wasn't a brawl. It wasn't a fight. The ultimate silent physical enforcement of the code, delivered in a moment of extreme professional attention. And the simplicity of Oakley's justification, as he quoted publicly, is just classic. Yeah, I slapped him, he talked too much. It is so perfect. It wasn't about the content of Barkley's speech or economic policy he was discussing or even a personal insult. It was a failure to abide by the code's fundamental rule: never talk more than you play. The action was the consequence for the lack of silence. The slap heard around the lockout. And it is truly the perfect metaphor. Barkley talks himself into trouble, and Oakley enforces the consequences. That is his method of operation, even when nobody asked for that enforcement in a union meeting. So here's where the psychological complexity of this feud really shines through, because we're talking about two vastly different reactions to the exact same event. They handle it completely differently, and it reflects their core values completely. Barkley's reaction seems to have been a simple shrug. He is described as joking about Oakley afterwards, never really appeared angry or like he was intent on seeking revenge. He views the world, and apparently a sudden slap in a union meeting, as just chaos that he can easily absorb and turn into a good story. But Oakley, decades later, he is still referencing the feud, still simmering, and his quote, "I probably got something for him next time I see him." That longevity of resentment is just profoundly revealing. To Barkley, it was a moment, a funny anecdote. To Oakley, it was a permanent, unresolved wound. Oakley wasn't just striking Barkley the man. I think compellingly that he was slapping the idea that talking gets you paid more than toughness. He was striking out against the fundamental transformation of the NBA towards celebrity and commentary. The psychological cost is so clear. Oakley was reacting to the painful realization that his entire value system, respect earned through silence and physical labor, was being systematically devalued by the league he had dedicated his life to. The league was actively leaving the Oakleys behind and replacing them with slicker media personalities, exactly like the one Barkley eventually became on TNT. The slap was desperate physical protest against the future. So the longevity of Oakley's grudge is a direct manifestation of his inability to reconcile with that professional shift. And since Barkley didn't react like a rival who played by the code, he reacted like a celebrity shrugging off a slight. The debt remained eternally unpaid in Oakley's mind. Barkley's continued success and laughter just dropped salt into the wound of his own personal obsolescence. This divide just cemented itself in the late 90s and early 2000s. Barkley is framed as one of the very first athletes to truly own his media persona. He was way ahead of the curve. He transitioned seamlessly from a star player to star commentator. He said whatever he wanted, courted controversy, and then just laughed it off. He proved he wasn't just a basketball player. He was an entertainment product built on this unfiltered, genuine truthfulness. And this division, the rise of personality and professional relevance over hard-fought principle, is what elevated Oakley's resentment from a minor locker room beef into this almost mythic philosophical conflict. The world he defended just stops making sense. He goes from being league's trusted physical protector to being its relic. His continued verbal jabs at Barkley became his necessary outlet for this broader existential frustration with the state of the league. It's like Maximus in the film Gladiator. It's so good. Maximus was the ultimate man of the code, fiercely loyal to the true power, driven by the principle and honor, but he was ultimately betrayed by the shifting whims of the new theatrical regime. Commodus, right? Maximus was a man out of time, seeking justice according to a code the modern world didn't even recognize. And Barkley in this analogy is perfectly cast as the showman in the arena. He is the character who understands the power flows not from merit or physical code, but from spectacle. Commodus needs the crowd. He needs the applause. He needs the controversy. Barkley needs the ratings, he needs the mic, he needs the authentic and unfiltered chatter. Both men were undeniably powerful in their chosen domains, but they operated under opposite truths. And that is precisely why the feud has never really died. The beef was never about determining who was right or wrong. No, it was about two vastly different versions of the NBA colliding into one another during the late 90s transition, and the fascinating synthesis is that both men ultimately won, just in different ways. Oakley kept his respect, and Barkley kept his relevance.